Hello and welcome to Friends International Guildford's Let's Talk About, and we're talking about racism today. It's a big topic, you may well have noticed. It's all over the interwebs, the social media. We've got two guests with us, Chris and Josi. Lily's with me as well this week. So we do this series of big topics every Monday pretty much, and we feel this one is appropriate. If you'd like to comment, please do ask questions. We've got a few questions for Chris and Josi exploring their experience in the UK, how the situation in America has affected them, why potentially we see such a big reaction in the UK at the moment, but also just hopefully something you as international students can take away from this conversation, what you can look forward to in the UK as well. So we're hoping to get this conversation a bit more than just a negative aspect of society at this point in time. So just to start off, really, if we just introduce yourselves and how you came to be in Guildford. Josi, would you like to start?
Yeah, sure. My name's Josi. I'm currently just finishing up a PhD at Surrey University, and I initially came here to do my undergrad, ended up sticking around after uni, and so I've been here now for about 10 years, which is crazy to think, but time flies.
It does.
So, yeah.
Awesome.
So what is your PhD in? Sorry, Chris.
It's in bladder physiology, and so very specific, as all PhDs are. But I'm looking at the function of the bladder. And so very sciencey.
Oh, I need to chat to you. My son has a duplex kidney, and that is obviously connected with the bladder and all those things. So he had a lot of tests. Yeah, we're gonna talk offline.
Yeah, that's probably a bit off topic for this conversation.
Slightly off topic. Sorry, Chris, over to you.
Yeah, well, it's not quite as exciting as Josi's, but just under 2 years ago, I came to Guildford to lead a church called Hope Church, and so I'm married to Catherine, and we've got 2 young children, and so we all made the move here together. And loving it so far, which is great.
There you go. Awesome. So just to introduce this, we've obviously got the historic stuff that's happened in the States. They've got a whole background that has led up to the protests following the death of George Floyd, the racist incidents in New York, and then also Ahmaud Arbery. All those, that long history has a ton of weight to it, which has led to the protests and the anger that we see. We also have protests happening in the UK. There is also a long history of racism all the way back to slavery and things like that. So that's a big history in the UK. And we've seen recently in the news a statue linked to slavery being pulled down and thrown into the sea in Bristol. So there is this big topic. Now, just to introduce the topic, we're coming from a Christian perspective. We are a Christian charity, and we believe that all humanity, all humans are made in the image of God and are therefore to be treated with value and worth. And that is inherent, no matter the color of your skin, the nation you come from. And that's part of our motivation, that we believe everyone deserves a warm welcome into Guildford. So that's the kind of foundation block of this conversation. But I think we can sometimes overlook things or not realize things are happening because they don't affect us. And I'm aware that I am the majority representative of Guildford, particularly. And so I'm just really keen to hear your experiences and to just listen to what you have to say about. And it may not be that your experience is specific to Guildford, having only been here for 2 years, but just to listen as to what your view on what we see around us is, and what kind of takeaways we as a organisation, Friends International, can offer to international students, but also as a student yourself, Josi, what you've found has helped as well. So that's kind of the background to the conversation. So maybe just start us off. What experiences have you had in your time in Guildford or wherever with racism?
Shall we start with the other question, maybe? Sorry.
Which one? Have I missed something? No, it's fine. If that's jumped straight in.
To start with, obviously, we have seen a lot of stuff happening in America. And I've had a few conversations with people. It's like, well, the UK is different. But maybe tell us a little bit more. How has stuff that has happened in America affected you? And maybe what are your experiences then coming from that of racism here in the UK? But let's start off with the current events and how has that really affected you in your lives and in your thoughts and emotions as well.
Yeah.
Josi.
So,
Sorry, Chris.
So I guess when I first saw the image of what happened to George Floyd, my first reaction was just not surprised. Which is quite sad when you think about it, the fact that this has happened so many times that you get to the point where you're just not surprised by what you see. But my heart instantly broke. And I think it's because although this did happen in America and although it seems as if something that has happened so far away, I think so many Black people across the world can identify with what happened with him because they've experienced racism within their own lives. It might not be what happened to George, but it might be something else. And we know that in America, that could be anyone's son, that could be anyone's father. But here we know that people around us can experience it in so many different ways as well. And so it was really painful to see that. And it really broke my heart. And there was a lot of emotions and a lot of remembering of things that might have happened to me in the past that I didn't really give time to heal from, that I had to really think about and delve deep into and process. So,
Chris?
Yeah, I think that, I mean, obviously it's shocking and it's horrific what happened there. And I think much like Josi, really, yes, there's shock because it's a tragedy and it's a terrible thing that's happened when someone who's meant to protect you is actually killing you. But I think, yeah, similarly, it's not the first time. You know, it's not like racism has been sorted and then suddenly it's flared up again. No, actually, this has been going on for years and years, and much like Josi was mentioning, yeah, all around the world. And so I think that for a lot of people like myself, we would have seen that happening, and you can then kind of, you know, again, much like Josi, you think about the experiences you've had, and it's really, you can have this kind of secondary trauma because you can imagine yourself in the same situation, and it brings back all those kind of memories, and so I guess, yeah, that's how it's affected me.
Shall I ask my question now?
Yes, you go ahead.
So following on from that, you're talking about secondary trauma. Can you give us some examples, if you're able to, of what those experiences are you're talking about, where that secondary trauma has come from, and what you've experienced in the UK?
Yeah, so
Chris, go for it.
Yeah, I'll go for it. Yeah, so first of all, for all those thinking about coming to Guildford or England, I want to say that it's overwhelmingly positive on the most part, but it is true that you may well experience some racism. So things that I've experienced over the last couple of weeks, I know that, you know, perhaps not as extreme as what happened with George Floyd, and it's definitely not, but much more subtle. Things like, you know, I went to a carpet shop where you had to book an appointment in order to go in, and there was a white lady in front of me, and as she approached, there was an assumption made on her that she would have gone to the lengths to book that appointment, and so she was welcomed in and shown in the door, asked what her name was, and come in. Then as I approached, the assumption was made that I hadn't already booked an appointment. And so it was very much like, oh, no, you can't come in here. And I was like, oh, no, but I've booked an appointment. And, you know, they eventually got my name. And even when I was in the shop and was allowed in, I made it very clear that I wanted the high end or the really good carpets. But for the first 10 minutes, I was shown all the really low end carpets. And I really had to convince them that I could go for something more expensive. And when I did, again, the comment was, well, we'll quote you up for this, and then when you perhaps realize it might not be in your budget, well, we can always come back down again. And so there's like this kind of subtle assumptions and comments that are made because of the color of my skin. Would be one example.
Yeah, I can so relate to that. I think, like, growing up, I remember multiple experiences of being told that I like act white, if that makes sense. And so that could be, so it kind of insinuates that the way that I talk or the way that I am is more of one color than another, which isn't right, because you can be anything you want to be with being Black. There's no specific experience or a specific way to talk or to look. And sometimes it insinuates that you sound more educated if you speak more white than if you speak Black, for example. I think a lot of some other things that have happened as well is just comments about like natural hair and stuff like that. I think a lot of Black girls can often experience that in terms of feeling like your hair is less beautiful because of how it looks or because of the texture of it. I think one thing that I realized recently or noticed recently was I was worried about what my hair looked like for an interview because I was worried about the fact that if they saw my afro or the way that my hair naturally looks, that they would think they'll be less inclined to actually give me the job. And that's something that shouldn't occur, is the hair that grows out of my head. And it's just as beautiful. And so, yeah, it's in the UK, I would say the racism that we see is way more subtle. It's way more just like the insinuated comments. It's more so things that people say without really thinking. And because of that, it can be quite hurtful, especially when it comes from friends or those around you that you love.
Yeah, I was just thinking, obviously, I don't know what it feels like for you guys, but from what I just heard through or what you shared, mustered up all the time, all those subtle comments, it's just another one. And it's just another, maybe not kicking the gut, but again, someone who is assuming something, or again, might not kneeling on your neck like it happened to George Floyd, but it's just all those little bits that never weigh on your self-esteem and your own image of yourself as well.
Yeah.
All right, so Josi, I know we've talked about it, Chris, where it's so subtle and you've just found yourself actually that's kind of accepting it. And what seems to have happened with the events around the situation is suddenly going, actually, no, this isn't right. I shouldn't have to accept this kind of subtle dig. And if it was a one-off, then sure, but this isn't a one-off. This is something that's compounded over time. And actually people aren't seeming to recognize as much. So, Lily, do you want to take the next question?
I was just wondering as well, if there are people, obviously we showing this live and there are people watching right now, if you have any questions or any comments, please do get in touch and we are happy to include that in the conversation. But also if you're watching that later, you're catching up and this is really hitting you and you want to talk about it, do get in touch, comment, and we're sure to forward those questions to Chris and Josi as well if they're not our questions. We're really keen to engage with you who are watching here as well, so do get in touch and comment in any way. But it is eye-opening to have those conversations. Certainly to me, who I grew up in Germany in a very white middle-class area, I can't remember seeing anyone in my school who was not German. So again, moving away from that little town where I grew up was so different again and eye-opening, and really listening to you. Thank you so much for sharing that with us and being open and honest about those struggles, because I think for us it's just so not on our radar, or wasn't up to now, I think, for most of us. So We really appreciate you taking that time. But we also want to hear stories of communities overcoming this issue and working together, and stories of reconciliation. And I was just wondering, do you have anything that you'd love to share with us, any stories of overcoming racism in your community, or where you've seen the opposite of those things happening, where you've seen people maybe the ways they grew up, or the ways they see the world, they've overcome that and worked together? Is there anything you have in your experience you want to share with us, just generally, and maybe talk a little bit through that process that we could learn from that as well? I think,
I guess for me, I've been able to have a lot more conversations with people recently that might not have been able to have, or might not have even thought to have had this conversation before all of this came to light. And what I've noticed is that people are just really receptive and really wanting to learn. And so I think one thing that I've noticed as well is being able to speak to people who might have said something that they didn't realize was problematic or painful, and just being able to communicate as to why that was hurtful, why people might have a problem with what you said, and then also just moving forward still as friends together. And that's been something that's been that I've seen a couple of times recently, which has been great.
Sorry to Chris, you're gonna get your time. I'm gonna ask you the same question in a second. Just Josi, how are you finding it? Do you find it overwhelming, friends getting in touch with all the same things, or are you a bit frustrated that it's taken so much for people to have those conversations? Or how do you feel about all of that? Is it getting a bit too much, or?
I think that it can actually, at some points it can be quite painful, not necessarily because of what they've said, but just because the image of what happened to George was so painful for a lot of people. And so just sometimes it feels like being reminded of those pictures quite often can actually be quite traumatic for some others. As Chris was saying, it's like secondary trauma, and so sometimes being reminded of that can be quite harmful for some people, quite painful. And so I think it really just depends on the person. I think it's important to remember to not be offended if your Black friend or someone who you've tried to contact hasn't responded or doesn't really want to talk about it, because they might be going through something that's quite painful. And so it's understanding that they might actually not be ready to talk about it or want to talk about it. But it's also it's actually been quite encouraging as well. People speaking to me and just asking me how I'm doing. That's been the most beneficial, actually. People just asking me how I'm doing, how I'm processing, because it helps to know that people actually care and that people are wanting to move forward together. So
yeah, that's really helpful. Chris, how about you? How are you finding lots of people? Well, I guess you are a church leader, so even more people probably would turn to you for advice anyway. So how are you finding out in that situation?
I think I'm finding it a little bit exhausting, actually, because not only are people turning to me to ask me, but also I'm then also trying to lead people through thinking these things through and to really understand it and get to grips with it. And people from the BAME, Black, Asian, minority ethnic community to process and understand, but also people from, I guess, the white, from white backgrounds or backgrounds like that to kind of really get to grips with it. And I think what has been, Phil mentioned that statue in Bristol, and I think, how is it that in the early 1800s slavery was abolished, and then in the late 1800s this statue went up, and up until yesterday it's still been up, and for the last 125 years Black people have had to walk past this statue of a man who was, I think it was 80,000 slaves he was part of selling, and I think that shock has resonated through a lot of the community, and lots of people are I see it, their comments on news feeds or getting in touch and saying, wow, like I can't imagine what that must feel like to have to walk past this statue, every day for the last 125 years. And I think that is really helping people in our community to understand a little bit of I guess, this kind of maybe not systemic racism, but something of the experience that it is for Black people. And in terms of just a story of reconciliation, when my dad first came to the UK, he couldn't speak English, and he worked as a farmer, and he was treated really badly. Lots of racist slurs, the N-word, kind of really put down in a big way for maybe about 8 years. And he worked there for about 15 years. And in the second part of that time working with these same 3 guys, I guess as he learned the language and as they spoke, and he would take gifts at Christmas, so even through the hardship, he would still try to maintain some kind of good relationship. And I remember that when one of them was dying, Dad would go to his house regularly, and there's this wonderful moment of them just kind of hugging, him saying sorry for how he treated him in the past, and kind of overcoming that. There was lots of grace needed on both sides. And I think that's what we kind of need today, all of us kind of looking at our own biases, our own prejudices that we all have, and coming at it with grace and humility and talking to people. And I think talking, like Josi was saying, that is the key. And yeah, also it is tiring because you're talking, but you're also processing and trying to understand, am I in this position because I'm ticking a token list, or am I here because I really deserve to be here? There's a lot of questions that people will ask themselves about the jobs that they're in. Yeah.
Thank you.
So it's all really helpful stuff. And in your conversations with people, the sort of stuff that you've been dealing with over the last, your whole experience of being in the UK and in Guildford, like what would you suggest to people in terms of overcoming biases? Have you had that conversation where you've been able to help someone through that, or a recognition that, your story has just helped with that? Have you got any ideas of how we might become more aware of our biases?
Yeah, good question. I think when I just thinking about it, I think probably these last couple of weeks is helping a lot of people recognize that they have biases and realize that, maybe the reason why I haven't connected with that person in the office or that person in my street is because I wasn't sure if we would have something to connect with. And maybe this is helping them to just think about that and overcome that. The biggest thing I think is learning. Lots of people have said, I'm now starting to, watch Netflix programs like The 13th, which is a great documentary about racism in America, and reading blogs, and that's helping people to understand, seeing the news articles about the statues, helping people, I think, to start to understand something of how this issue isn't something that was done and dusted 100 years ago, but it's still prevalent today.
Yeah, I think the first tip that I would say is to remember that having underlying biases is something that a lot of people struggle with. It doesn't make you a terrible person, doesn't make you horrible. It just means that you've got something that you need to dismantle within your thought process. I think a lot of the times people can stop themselves from dealing with the thoughts that they may have because they are more afraid of being called a racist than they are of the offensive thoughts that they might actually have. And so it's actually not worrying about, I think it's just more so about having more empathy towards the Black community than stressing about if you are a racist or not, if that makes sense. And I think it's, as Chris was saying, it's learning as well. The 13th is an incredible documentary. It blew my mind when I watched it. There's so many great talks out there and books out there that will help you to figure out the history of racism, why it is still such a prevalent thing. I think it's also important to remember that racism has been here for a very long time. And so sometimes dismantling our biases and our thoughts may take a bit of time, but it's definitely worth the work, because for a lot of people it's affecting a lot of Black people and how they see themselves, or the day-to-day interactions that they have. And so it is so important that we dismantle the thought processes and the painful biases that we may have. And so, yeah, just thinking about why you do the things you do, why you might not have, as Chris said, connected to that Black friend that you thought that you should have, or why you see someone's culture as weird rather than something that's different. And so, yeah.
I think that's really, really important distinction of understanding difference and not hiding, not trying to cover this difference or ignore it, but recognizing it and celebrating it. And I think that's part of the key, is noticing things that are different, as you say, aren't weird. And that's one of the key things we've noticed in Friends International when we meet people of other cultures and they're doing something different. Is I don't do it like that. The instinct is to go, that's weird, but it's just different. Why do you do that the way you do? And let's figure this out and actually enjoy that difference. I think is really, really important. That and we're finding ways to do that and learning as well, and different ways of communicating that we find in other cultures as well. So that's a really key thing and helpful thing to do.
And I think what you said as well, Josi, is don't feel guilty about it, but start working on it. I think is quite helpful, because I think sometimes people can just feel so guilty and so overwhelmed that they're not doing anything about it. But actually start working on it and get informed about it and start those conversations and continue to have those conversations, and not finish those conversations by the end of the week because it's not on social media anymore. I guess it's going to be on social media a little bit longer, hopefully. But I think it is reach out, read things, watch appropriate series or documentaries, and start to learn, and don't feel guilty about it, and don't be buried by that guilt, but actually take steps. I think that is really, really helpful. Thank you. And obviously, Josi, you are a PhD student on campus. You work with international students on campus in your labs. I assume you have international students in your labs as well, because they're everywhere, which is wonderful. But what would you say, and obviously Chris, as someone who's moved recently to Guildford as well, fairly recently, but what would you say to anyone, and particular international students, thinking about moving to Guildford, not knowing what the situation here is, but what would you tell them, and when they worry maybe about racism amongst all the other things to worry about at the moment? What advice would you give? Maybe let's start with Josi, and then Chris can go to the general public moving to Guildford.
I think on campus, I guess I've had way more good experience with people than I've had bad experiences with people. And so it's just remembering that, I think it's just not stressing too much about what the overall response may be to you being there, but knowing that the majority of experiences that you will have will be lovely and will be nice on campus. And also there are so many different societies that you can join, and groups for your culture, for the country that you came from, which will help you to feel as if you're not alone on campus. And so those are really great resources to meet people who people that are from where you are from, but to also not be afraid to speak to those that look different and to those that are different, because those are sometimes some of the most beautiful friendships that you can build with others. And so basically, don't be worried about building friendship with someone who looks different, because you might think they might have a bias, because you never know what the truth may be, and it may end up being a really wonderful friendship. So
I think that's really helpful. That's quite wonderful. Chris, what would you say, not necessarily student specific, I know you have quite a few students in your church as well, but what would you say to anyone thinking about moving from an international context, moving to Guildford?
Yeah, I think overall you'll love it, and you'll be welcomed. You'll have a great time, and lots of people will tell you that Surrey is predominantly white and middle class, and that is true. But there are lots of different cultures here. All you need to do is walk into Tesco's, and you'll see a array of different cultures, from lots of different African countries to Malaysia, Singapore, and Asian countries to from the Americas, and I get my hair cut by some Colombians, and I think that you won't be alone, actually. Being so close to London as well, half an hour from London, lots of great opportunities to meet people from all sorts of different backgrounds, and certainly Friends International Guildford, especially if you're a student, will help you very much in
Nice plug there, thank you.
Nice plug, yeah.
That's great. Yeah.
I have one final question, if that's okay. Unless for you have 5 more.
I do, but best not.
But Chris, for you, I was wondering, as a church leader, and we've already kind of talked a little bit about that, but how are you finding you have internationals in your church, but I assume if the church looks still fairly similar to what it used to, it's predominantly white church. How are you finding that, leading them through this time when there's a lot of reflection happening and a lot of reconciliation, a lot of just confused people, I guess, as well? How is that for you as a leader, as a church leader, as a Christian, all combined?
Yeah, I think that a couple of things. One is that we're trying to take it slow. We don't want to overwhelm people with talking about the wide array of different issues that come with racism, from maybe sort of systemic issues to white privilege to experiences that people have. That there's just such a wide array, and so the first step is just taking it slowly, and that's what we're currently doing as a church, is making sure people have time to reflect and to learn and just to read and to absorb. And I think the other thing is that, it's important that we do, declare that this isn't a white issue or a black issue. This is a people issue, and every single person in the world will have their own biases and prejudices. And so actually it's quite natural for every single one of us to search into our hearts for where we have judged others. And so in that sense, I feel like that's where we've been coming from in this whole area. And so as I've spoken to the church, I've always been, and honestly, been sure to say that I am learning and processing, reflecting and repenting, and saying sorry to God for the areas where I have got this wrong and made assumptions or judgments on people that were unfair. And so, I think that, we know that we love a God who has made all mankind, and yes, all lives matter, and certainly because of that, Black Lives Matter, and that is why this is an important issue. It's an important topic, and I think I emailed 20 people or so from the BAME community in our church yesterday to interview them and just to listen and to hear their experience. And I think we're gonna play that on Sunday, and that will help our church just to understand these are people in our church and our community. Listen to them, and let's see if we can work together in moving forward.
Yeah, that's really helpful. Thank you. And I think we all need to be better in celebrating differences. And I think, one of our friends from my church, who's Black, he said that is something God created that to his praise and for his glory, and that's something that we should be using to marvel about an amazing creator and his creativity, and seeing so many different forms of life and of humanity on the earth. and really something that should get us all excited about. This is an amazing God who has had such an amazing creativity. That's all from me, Phil.
Well, I don't have any more questions. I do, but we have hit the 30-minute mark. So just to keep this accessible to people, is there anything final that you guys want to say before we start wrapping this conversation up for now? Just put you on the spot.
I think I'm good.
I think you're good.
Any big wise final words we can
Something
put out
profound
on Twitter and Instagram with nice pictures in the background?
Sorry, you can always send it as a text later, and then I'll...
Actually, I've got one.
Go on.
The only thing I would say is I read this quote the other day that said it's something like, we won't always hold on to the things that our enemies say, but we do remember the silences of our friends. And so if you are someone who perhaps are in the majority culture in the place that you live, my encouragement to you would be to speak out on behalf of those of the minority community or the minority people that are being perhaps treated badly, because it will help them massively. And often I feel a pressure to comment back to people's comments and to sort of stand up, and actually it would be so helpful if some of my friends did that, and I see that happening a lot, and that, that just shows that solidarity that we have together in facing the issue, which is racism, which is bad, not people necessarily, if that makes sense.
It's helpful.
So that was,
I think just having that posture of listening and not being defensive is one that I'm seeing. And when you're in the majority and you see some of the things coming through, it sounds like it's everyone in the majority is racist, and that's not. Some people might think that, but then that's their problem. And so we need to just listen, hear that the experience is happening, recognize it's happening, and then figure out what to do together moving forward. And I think standing with rather than standing up for, if that makes sense, is significant difference. I think it's not my role to save people. It's my role to stand with people. And so I think with all the things that you've shared, it just helps show that the picture, yes, it exists, but actually there is also hope that we can talk, we can work together to figure out how to move forward in this as a society, as smaller communities in churches, just recognizing that there is hurt there, and we want to find ways to reconcile and heal that hurt where we can. I just want to say thank you so much for your time this evening, and it's so good to talk to you. Just for everyone watching, Chris and I do know each other very well, as I also help lead Hope Church, but and it's great to be able to continue this conversation and see how we can move it forward together. Lily, do you have anything else to say?
No, aside from good luck, Josi, with your hopefully happening wedding.
Thank you.
Yeah.
October.
Have to see what happens, but thank you.
Yes. But hopefully we're going to see each other on campus before that.
Yes.
Cool. Awesome. Well, thanks again. And for those of you watching, feel free to comment, subscribe on our YouTube. There's loads of content going onto YouTube.
No naughty comments. They're going to be blocked.
Yes, I have blocked one naughty comment already. But it's quite funny. But anyway, well, please do subscribe. Please do like our Facebook page. And if you are a volunteer, thank you for volunteering with us. Hopefully this has been helpful. If you're considering volunteering, get in touch as well. We think that the diversity on campus is something to celebrate. We love working with international students, and we hope that if you do face instances of racism, we are a group that can help you work through that, and we can help you get through it and enjoy your time in Guildford. So on that note, we'll end this broadcast, and we'll see you next week.
Bye, everybody.